All right, I think we are all here, maybe. Okay, awesome. All right, so welcome everyone. Let's see here. I want to make sure that we got everybody online. So, we'd like to thank the UNG Art Gallery for organizing this event for us, and thank you for everyone joining us today on this chat. We will be talking with Neil Summerour. Hi there. So, if anybody doesn't know who he is type designer and founder of Positype. His notable typefaces include NFL All-Pro Sands, Girl Scout scripts, Victoria One for Victoria's Secret, and many more. So I don't want to keep you guys waiting. We wanted to chat with him for quite a while, so I will leave it up to Neil.
You know, when you do these types of things, there really should be like Zoom should like incorporate some kind of like background music while you're waiting, because I see all these squares of names popping up, and I'm like, oh holy hell, I gotta sound professional and stuff.
We can do
And there should
beatbox for
be
you.
at least some kind of heightened music. I need, okay. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Holly. Yeah, I'm nailing it. Yeah, I'm sucking. Okay, so Holly is not allowed to heckle me, but I see Nancy and Courtney, they can heckle. And Tiffany can just go, oh dear God, please make him shut up. Hi, everybody. Hey, am I host now? Can I share my screen?
I believe so.
Because the quicker I can get the camera off of my face, the happier I am. Okay. Let me see if I can share my screen now. Sweet. No. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay, that's wrong. That's better. Okay. Yeah, like Tiffany said, I'm Neil Summerour. I'm better known online as Positype. It's a foundry I created really 2 decades ago, which is kind of scary when you think about it. Before I start rambling, first, again, thank you, University of North Georgia and Tiffany and Victoria for putting all this together and convincing me to sit in front of a camera awkwardly. I am going to be talking about my work, but because there are students involved, I always get on a little soapbox and talk for a couple of minutes. I did promise to not be boring, so we will get to some fun stuff, I promise. But I wanted to talk to students a little bit very quickly about controlling your narrative, and I will be using that as a common theme through my talk today, mostly to address from the standpoint of how I kind of found my niche, and since finding my niche, being able to control the way I'm sharing my work and the type of work that I'm doing and trying to reinforce that. It's something it's very important to me to make sure that I get across. So yeah, that's Positype, that's me. I used to say it's just me, but by the end of the conversation, I'll be showing that it's not just me anymore, which is something I'm rather proud of. I used to call myself a type designer and lettering artist. For many years, I split those duties. But now, really, I just call myself a type designer. I leave the lettering to people that I feel are far more competent and devote far more time to it. So it seems almost egotistical to call myself a lettering artist when primarily I focus in type design. For clarification, I am not a typographer. For those that use that word a little loosely, that's okay. I am not a typographer. I draw type. for people to use, and I will entrust them to make it look fantastic. Um, I've had this question asked before. I am not an influencer. I am the furthest thing from it. I use social media to the extent that I feel comfortable showing my work, but I am very uncomfortable just going and bragging about my work. I'd much rather brag about others. That's just a personal thing. Um, so who really cares? Hopefully nobody. Maybe my mom. I don't know. The dog, because it usually means I give her treats because I'm here in the studio all day. But what I try to focus on is those basic details of being a type designer. I like to try to keep people reading, and keep people engaged with the type that I'm producing. But as as time has gone on, and as technology and the demands for people wanting to be able to use type in different ways, kind of that role of a type designer has changed. In the past, this is what people typically thought type designers were and looked like. These little persnickety people, kind of, obsessing over all of the little details and all of that. Oh, and any UNG student that can tell me who this is, by next Friday, I'll have something for you. I notice I did not put his name, but I'm going to jump off now and make this harder. Okay, so in the present, type designers really are artists, linguists, historians, marketing gurus, programmers, psychologists, legibility experts when they can actually talk, and then a type designer. We have to consider all of these roles and a lot of others when we are both trying to design typefaces for retail consumption and for the creative user, as well as custom type. Now, I like to best describe it as my youngest daughter described it when she was in kindergarten. Teachers were going around and, trying to talk to each one of the kids to give them an opportunity. What does your mama do? What does your daddy do? And stuff like that. And my youngest daughter said to her teachers that I draw the alphabet all day and people give me money. And I found out about this through the teacher who I went to pick her up, and she was like, look, I've got to ask you, this is what your daughter said you did. And then I had to have that very awkward conversation trying to explain what a type designer does, and that I make the fonts. And usually you have to use the examples of, hey, you have Microsoft Word, those fonts, the computer doesn't make those, somebody else does. But with everything said, I still consider myself very fortunate. I found my niche, the thing that I probably enjoy the most. And I emphasize this to students and other people within the creative industry. I didn't settle. It took years to kind of get to the point where I feel like I have found my niche and I know how I can operate within it. And as I say to everybody, I really do hope you find your niche, find the thing that causes you to get up every day and do it again. Now, why do I want people to find their niches? Because we need more people within the creative industry on a whole, and we need better representation. In my role with TypeCon, TypeCon is a type and lettering conference that is put on annually, although with the pandemic that has been a bit of a challenge. That conference is put on by the Society of Typographic Aficionados, of which I served as a chair for about 3 years for SOTA, and now have transitioned to chair for the conference. And it is becoming increasingly apparent that more and more attention needs to be given to representation across the spectrum. And it's kind of one of the things that I have been probably the most keenly focused on within that organization and within the conference for the past few years. Those that know me know how passionate I am about it. That said, the demands on creative professionals are high, but honestly, they're not as high as what you're putting on yourself, especially rising creatives, those that are still trying to find their niche or find their way. Just keep doing it. Do not expect something to happen overnight. Take your time. Really take your time. Nothing has to be rushed. The people that you're seeing online that may have thousands and thousands of followers, it doesn't really mean anything if their work isn't good. And they have probably had the opportunity of years and a lot of other help to get to where they are. And it does not happen overnight. Continue to be deliberate in the work that you do and experiment. Hone your craft, which is an obsessive statement that I say about my own work, and control your narrative. And see, there's some wittiness there. See, I got this. Okay, so that said, find the aspects you enjoy. Find the like-minded creatives that reinforce and cheer you on, and find ways to inspire yourself. Get up every day. Find what it is that keeps you engaged and keep going. Now, I won't preach anymore. That's it. And I promise I'm going to shut up and show some work. But this, now that I get to show the work, I get to show you how I've kind of found a way to control my narrative. I started this craziness around 2000. Back in the good old days, 20 years ago. Wow, that's sad. You didn't have really social media. I think you had some dial-up stuff going on. You didn't have a lot of online programs or workshops and whatnot that were focused on type design. The software was old and frustratingly antiquated, and honestly, it kind of sucked, but that's what you had. So you had to learn the software, you had to learn your craft on your own, and interact when you could. So during about 2000 to 2009, I really kind of considered it a hobby. As 2009 approached, and we were about to have a second daughter, I started listening to accountants and everything else to really understand that my hobby should be my primary focus. So 2009, I started actually referring to myself as a type designer. By then I was publishing typefaces with various distributors, had launched the Foundry, had launched Positype, and had started developing bespoke typefaces for customers based on inquiries, and was comfortable. Now for me, what I'm known for and what I enjoy the most, complex systems. And if you've ever seen any of my typefaces, you'll understand, and I'll show some of that just a little bit. I like to push contrast and mass. When I talk about type design, that's probably the thing I lecture about the most, is about how to control those two to your advantage. And I like trying to keep a work-work balance. One time I said that, people were like, that's disastrous. You should have a good work-life balance. And I was like, nope, I'm a smartass. I like my work-work balance. I already have a life. What I mean by work-work balance is, as much as I do work for the Foundry and for retail releases, I do work for clients on a bespoke basis. And because of that, it allows me to explore and push my comfort zones so that I'm not just generating the same thing over and over again without much effect. I'm very prone to develop iteratively. I like to take a concept, explore it, push it as far as I can, and revisit it later, each time trying to improve upon it or improve upon either the design or the technology behind it or how it works. I do consider the creative process cyclical. I've had people disagree with me on this. I'm not entirely sure why. It's not because I have like a super pretty graphic that I use, but I do believe this concept behind being a creative and both producing type or any visual or written exploration, it's cyclical. You work through, you resolve, you learn, you then do something with it, and then hopefully you are successful or at least satisfied with that execution, and then you start the process all over again. Now, work-work balance. I will talk about Victoria's Secret for just a little bit. I don't talk about them as much now just because there's been so many other things, but this particular project that I carried out with them led to another typeface that has ended up winning a number of awards, and one that I'm very proud of just because of how complex it ended up being. So in this case, Victoria's Secret project wraps up, Flirt script begins, and we'll go back to the Victoria's Secret project quickly. This is for catalogs in 2009 and 2010. The idea of creating this wire-thin, somewhat cursive, somewhat kind of crazy typeface that would be used in the catalog, which then led to more of a lettering exploration where they would use the typeface to mock things up as they were working through shoots, then send those files to me, and then I would actually rework that as lettering to kind of fit the catalog better. So there was an interesting duality. Not only were they using the typeface in sections of the spreads, but then we could, because of the work that had been done towards that typeface, then actually push it more towards lettering so that it would fit the layouts. One of the things that you'll hear me talk about quite often when I am doing type design from either, retail or with client, I always start analog. I always pick up a pen or a brush or a pencil and I start drawing. I have found, it could just be that I'm old too, so, cabbage patch, that whole little conversation earlier. I find it's very limiting to sit down at the computer first. You should not be in a position where you're controlled by pixels. You should be controlled by what your hand will allow you to do. And for me, it's picking up tracing paper, picking up some type of implement, start sketching, make notes, explore all the various iterations before you ever go to the computer. Then once it's in the computer, then you can adjust it. I do work with various implements, and a lot of it is based off of how I'm comfortable that particular day or the type of movement. Sometimes the implement allows a different degree of movement. So I may sketch very quickly with pencil to get the idea down and then see if I can work modulation of a stroke and see how it plays out. So I will go to brushes very often, and I like to explore various iterations until I'm very convinced that I've got what I like. Now, all of this work that I did for Victoria's Secret left me with a big hole creatively, because I knew that it could be pushed further, but both the client and the scope of work really didn't demand that. So after that project was done, then I started exploring this concept again from cursive handwriting. And, like I said, or like I did in the little description about me, I was that kid in school that won all the handwriting competitions, and people hated me for that. I don't care. You can hate me. I don't know why. I like drawing. I like writing letters. But even back then, I understood without knowing the proper terminology about entry points and how letters needed to kind of come together to form very fluidic shapes. And I think that helped back then. And it was something that's always kind of sat in the back of my head. And with this project, it kind of led to the same thing. I see if I can slide mouse over. I don't think I can because of the way this is. I can talk about it later. But with Flirt had several entry points. And you think about where one letter transitions to the next letter. Like in this little example, the first lowercase m transitioning into the B, that's very low. But the B transitions very high into the U because of the nature of the next letter. And that U transitions at a different point to the R. And that R transitions at a median point on the G. So with this particular typeface, I created variations of each one of these letters at each one of those entry points into the next letter, and then relied on OpenType and the coding that I did on the back end, so that as you type, it just naturally changes the letter before it to accommodate the letter after it. And it becomes a more fluidic expression, and it looks less mechanical, less scripty. And if you don't exactly get that, just go and play with a few script typefaces and see where they strike. Some will always have a commonality to their strike, where they're always striking at the same point. Some will adjust. Me, I wanted to adjust. Another thing I wanted to do was come up with something that was so thin that you could not see it. I wanted to see just how far I could push it. And this was actually in FontLab. So those that know FontLab, okay, now I think I can push it even further, and will, with newer technology. But that's way down in the queue. Okay, but as I played with this and I went to release it, I had already had the benefit of knowing that it had started winning awards. I wanted to introduce it to everybody in a fun way. So I worked with some animators. I went to Athens. So if you're poking around, you're looking at these photos, you're familiar with Georgia. I just went downtown Athens at like 3 o'clock in the morning, so I wouldn't get in trouble. Walked onto UGA's campus, started taking photos, and then went back with the animator with the photos and some of the lettering layouts so that we could just kind of give this type a little bit of life. Let it flirt, excuse me for the bad pun there, on the screen. Now, this typeface, I think, was released in 2011. So yeah, you might go, oh yeah, that's easy to do. 2011, that was 10 years. Holy crap, that was 10 years ago. So yeah, it was kind of a thing. I got in trouble a little bit too. UGA police didn't really like me walking around taking photos. I don't know why. Okay, that's a little cute stuff. All right, so work balance. Another client in this case. With this, it was something that had already been developed, and then we used it as a starting point to push it further and to push it within the platform that they were wanting to do, wanting this custom typeface for. Clear Sans is one of my typefaces, and Oculus reached out. They needed a brand typeface, something that they would be able to use for all of their branding, but they also wanted to see that typeface kind of form the basis for all of the user interfaces within the Oculus headsets and other digital platforms that were syncing with it. So there was a little bit of work that had to be done with that typeface to kind of accommodate this odd shifting within this virtual environment. Now, Clear itself, um, very contemporary sans serif typeface, but still kind of expressive from the standpoint of how some of the letters were formed and kind of in line with how I like to draw letter forms and keep warmth within those forms. As we tested some of these, some of the aspects of the typeface, rendering at that time was a bit challenging, so there were adjustments that were made. This shows kind of the difference between Clear Sans and what ultimately happened with Oculus Sans. You'll see some of the flaring, some of the strike points with the strokes coming different, basically to accommodate the odd shifting that would be encountered. Just again, this was the focus on legibility and to make sure that things worked. And we pushed it a little bit further for other devices. So there was a separate set of typefaces just referred to as screen. There was a bit more taken out mass-wise to kind of accommodate how the individual glyphs rendered. And once the Latin component of the typeface was complete, then shifted to Cyrillic. And from Cyrillic, then shifted to Hangul, so that it was Korean at the time. Samsung was partnering with Oculus to produce the hardware, so we definitely had to have Korean. And then after that, Japanese, or that's actually Korean, and then Japanese. So that final type system for Latin and Cyrillic was what, 10 weights? When there was 5 for screen and then 5 for the Korean, and then there was a monospaced version used specifically on the back end for developers. That was a lot of letters in what was ultimately a short amount of time. I had about 9 months to complete that project. And that wasn't something that was very flexible because of when they were going to be going to market. But that said, it was rather rewarding to see it both show up in print form and on all the presentations and screens and on the apps. And you know, a little bit of a Game Boy, not as much now. I'm older, but it is something when you see your typefaces actually making its way onto controllers. Yeah, that's something like the inner geek in me is kind of screaming and kind of thinking it's cool. All right, so next project, Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts came to me several years ago. At the time, they were using one typeface, part of their rebrand, but they fairly quickly identified that they needed a lot more. They needed a bit more control in how the type was being used. Plus, they had really looked at what their needs were from the standpoint of how the typefaces were being used. And it wasn't so much that they needed one generic typeface that worked across everything. They needed to appeal to young girls, tweens, teens, and even the donors. So basically, the way I look at it at that point is NDA up and audit, so that I can get in and look at everything and ask a bunch of questions, sometimes good stuff, bad stuff, ugly stuff, uncomfortable stuff, when you're looking at basically putting together a system like this. I define the brief, which for me is fundamentally one of the most important parts of the project, because I want the client to understand fully what I understand and give them the opportunity to correct me, just as well as better defining what their wants and needs are. I try to be a people pleaser when it comes to designing type. I try to provide both, but sometimes some of the wants are not realistic within the scope of the needs. So you need to have time to explain to them and to illustrate that explanation. So ultimately, the end result was a need for flexible sans that had a bit more personality and movement to it, that was, in their eyes, more attractive to girls, which was a hard thing to kind of define because I thought that was a little odd. They needed a matching serif. They wanted a layered display type that they could use both in publications and in manuals in their own printing, because they have enormous printing needs. And they wanted generational scripts, scripts from the standpoint of script typefaces, not languages. We stuck within Latin, but they wanted script typefaces that could be used in different ways and not just a single typeface. So once all of that has been established, then it's leave me alone and let me go sketch. Yes, students, this sounds very cliche, but you have to do it. Sketch. You don't sit down at the computer yet. So for me, I took about a month and did nothing but sketch across all of the different themes that had been put together in the brief to see if I could find some harmony and balance between all of the shapes, because I wanted everything to essentially reside within the same type of space. So same cap height, same X height, same ascenders, descenders, so that these typefaces could be interchangeable within layouts, though it may operate within a slightly wider or narrower footprint. In general, if they changed out one typeface for another, it would not drastically change layouts. Here, I can't remember. I think this is probably third or fourth set of just quick exemplar sketches as I'm trying to develop through the sans serif. At this point, I was not very happy with it. It was still too rigid, too straight. But as time progressed, it improved. I started getting or a feel more for the personality of how I wanted the type to progress through the letter forms, a bit more curling and shaping, and ultimately this idea of the ponytail kept sitting in the back of my head, and it was how to express that. But once that was in my head, I couldn't shake it, and everything started kind of coming together. I will say sometimes, when people look at my sketches, they're like, I don't understand why you don't draw all of the letters sometimes. And it's because of how I see the letter forms. I know that ultimately, if I draw a section, all I have to do is then go grab other sections when I'm very quickly prototyping. And I can flip and shape and move other pieces into place. And this is, oh my gosh, this is probably, this set that I'm showing right here is probably 90% of the way through that month of sketches. So at this point, it's kind of like, what the letter forms are going to be. Kind of give an idea. 2015 to 2016, you can see the progression between some of the fundamental letter forms. You see how the A changed, and where that concept of a ponytail kind of popped up. You'll also see interesting swells and flares showing up in the strokes. That actually gets picked up even more in the serif, and I'll show that in just a second. Ultimately, trefoil sans ended up looking like this, and to kind of compare it to the typeface that they were using before, Omnis, which is a fantastic typeface, but didn't hit everything that they needed. That's okay. We go and draw until we find something that does work. With all of that, this is the suite of typefaces that were put together, the sans slab instead of the serif. The serif just didn't seem to work with the context of the rest of the typefaces. So we went to a slab, which gave a fantastic opportunity to do some fun stuff, since there was not enough time or budget to produce both text and display typefaces. I found an interesting compromise to create a set of typefaces that could operate in both based off of weight and mass that we end up using. So you'll see the trefoil DIY before I go on, because the next slide is kind of leading up to that. That ended up being a series of layers that they could play with. And yeah, those were all hand drawn, which was cool. I say that, and there's this rather aggressive kind of shaking going on in my head, but it wasn't cool. It sucked. It took so much time, but it needed to be authentic. So, so once these typefaces were close to being done, now it's time to kind of test. And because the Girl Scouts is so large, so broad, and reaches so many different parts of the country, you really needed to kind of test them. And this was something that I have learned a lot of type designers don't like, but from my standpoint, I did, because I don't know, maybe I'm just a masochist, but I wanted focus groups, I wanted A/B tests, and the Girl Scouts was very much wanting to do this, and they executed it wonderfully, allowing the girls to kind of respond to not only the typefaces that had been produced, but other typefaces to see if we were kind of hitting that as well. It gave the local chapters time to kind of assess what was going on, so that they had buy-in, as well as learning how that they could be used. And I talked about the ponytail. This was probably the funnest part for me, is actually putting this into the letter G, because it spoke so well within the context of the typeface, and was just kind of like this little hidden thing that if you knew, you knew, but if you didn't, you didn't. It's okay. Kind of give a little bit of a comparison between the sans and the slab. You can see as the mass increases within these letter forms, you're not going to be using these heavier weights small. They're always going to be large, but it allowed a lot more expression to come out, both in the slabs and in just the common stroke forms, so that they could take on the role of a display typeface and have more presence and personality. But the lighter weights shed a good bit of that detail out, which was fine because of how they would end up being used. Earlier I mentioned about the type managing to keep commonality between all of the letter heights, both between the cap heights, the X heights, ascenders, descenders, all of that was actually successful, and the system worked quite well. And now at this point, all the typefaces are essentially locked down. I get to be a nerd and give them usage guides, how to access all of the different features, because there was a number of things hidden within the typeface between the alternates, old style numerals, small caps, fractions, and even these extra buttons and whatnots that we kind of snuck in there to give greater flexibility for any of the creatives in the local chapters that were using the typefaces. Ultimately, I was very happy with how they rolled it out and started implementing the typefaces. I see a good bit of it on social media, which is great. And it's been very rewarding to kind of see them succeed with the type and allow their personality for the organization to kind of come through. Kind of wrapping that one up, 55 fonts across 6 families, and of course word fonts. Nowadays, that's almost expected. Now, one more big project, and then we'll get out of this little presentation and I'll start showing some real life stuff. National Football League came to me. This is another one of those complex systems where they needed a suite of typefaces to kind of go through a series of goals that they had in kind of unifying both their type presence, but their visual identity on screen, on mobile, And there was a lot of specific needs, but like with all bespoke typefaces, we have to assess the need and want, and like I said, audit. And I don't always enjoy the audit process because it usually uncovers some stuff that I have to go back to and ask. And I hate asking uncomfortable questions, but it's to get a better idea. But their audit at that time kind of unveiled a number of typefaces that were being used, and you can kind of see the selections that they had. There's both some similarity where you question why you have more than one of these typefaces being used, plus some rather awkward disparity. So there was a lot of time back and forth trying to discuss how we could distill these different types of options that they were using and where they really wanted to go with it. The result from that was to produce a sans serif typeface. This would kind of be the primary typeface. It would be used for all their documents that they would have in print, plus all of the online component. And when I say online, we're talking about web, we're talking about their mobile platforms, we're talking about on screen for the NFL Network. I had called this one Post, which it takes on a different name later. It would serve as a digital companion to the Sans. It would have a much more efficient footprint. And then a Stats, which was for compact and small usage. So, of course, with everything Sketch, I think that was one of the first sketches, which is funny because usually I see that clients go with later sketches. They kind of jumped on this one. So start iterating based off of those variations. And this is just a nice little thing to illustrate where it went. But actually, I don't draw with red lines. It's just pretty on this page. And then test those iterations. And what I mean by that is, as I would work through letter forms in testing to see which worked best, the client would receive these sheets. And to the trained eye, you will very quickly see there were multiple variations being explored and tested. And I worked with not only my principal contact, but his whole design team to kind of test these to see kind of A/B style, which one they liked better. And there was a lot of marking on these pages that I would send, and they would scan everything that they would remark on and send them back. And then these would be refined further and further until we kind of hit on all of the different shapes. And then at that point, those shapes would be tested on screen and in the various ways we needed. Ultimately, we ended up with 16 total fonts, 8 weights, obviously matching italics. I was happy with how this typeface came together. And even happier to see how they're using it. Obviously, we settled on the name All Pro Sans. And with the various tests, I had to provide recommended typographic scales that were more common spoke descriptions for all of the different teams. So print, mobile, web, home. Home was a rather interesting category, and that we had to test it to make sure of how it would render on television screens, not only for the network, but if it was like in the case of fantasy teams and stats being displayed, we had to make sure that everything like that rendered. There was a lot of consideration given to how letters would be translated. So your ones and your L's were definitely delineated from just the shape of the uppercase I, so that there was no disparity. And all of the numerals, irrespective of weight, were all designed to be tabular, so that everything always lines up at all times. Again, for stats and stats comparison, it's just much easier. Now, speaking of stats, with the stats typeface, it would be used for anything written small or anything that fell in columns. I'm not going to go into a bunch of nerdy stuff, but you can see the comparison. The sans is in the orange, the stats is in the red. You can see the profile of the letters width-wise essentially stayed the same, some variation, but the cap height itself adjusted, went a little bit lower. The apertures of the letters, that's the areas that open up. Instead of curling in a more grotesque style, they opened up in a more contemporary way. And this was really to just increase legibility, make it much easier for this stuff to render, and so that things didn't get bled together. With stats, we had eight fonts, not as much in this case, 4 weights, matching italics, obviously typographic scales. The last typeface meant I got to bend bars. The display typeface, which would be used in most of the on-air rendering, we explored different ways of handling this and what worked best from my standpoint, and they agreed. What I refer to as a multi-radii approach, the last one that you see here, these are actually working 2 different radii, so it's actually kind of acting like you bent an actual pipe. So you'll have a bit more of a pinch, which opens up the space a little bit more. And this ends up with the display typeface. But a little kink, as we tested this, there became some rather interesting needs. And what I mean by that is I would say, look at your news programs, especially cable news. You'll see sometimes where they squeeze the type and it looks kind of horrible. And you can hold it against them a little bit, but I didn't want that. So I proposed taking the masters that were developed and creating a much narrower version and a much wider version. And then a fair amount of instruction of how these could be used so that the on-air department knew when to use what typefaces where. And how it would always kind of come together. So it was good. The creative team there is a fantastic group of people. Very responsive, very knowledgeable in what they wanted, really kind of communicated, which with a project as complex as this, the more communication I get, the better. Some rather, just calling out some of the rather interesting traits on the typeface: compact, rather square, truncated all the diagonals, because they never rendered the way you wanted on screens, especially if you had the ticker down at the bottom where you have a bunch of type moving. There's always a bit of a challenge. Okay, almost done. Thank God. Now, I'm not supposed to forget about the All Pro icons. So I have to switch to glyphs. Okay, I'll switch to glyphs. I'm still sharing, but I'm going to do a new share and do this screen. All right, let's move that out of the way. Hey, see, it's again, don't miss the glyphs. Okay, so in glyphs, not that one, silly. That's later, not that one. All Pro icons. Here we go. So this past year, they came to me and said, okay, now that we have All Pro sans out of the way, we need a set of icons that we can use mostly for mobile and web at various scales. And can we make it work within the same construct of the typeface? And I said, sure. I said, there are things that we would have to do to accommodate some of the letter forms, but for this to work, we would have to keep in mind the various weights. So they understood the same type of thing. As it got larger, if they wanted heavier weight being used, then they could easily shift to that. But as they worked smaller, there were those transitional weights that seemed to fit best. So everything was produced for those, and ultimately produced a series of fonts. This is just a master file. where all of this resided. But you can see by the color coding, these ended up being grouped into several typefaces so that it was a bit easier to kind of locate everything. But with this, the primary focus was making sure that we balanced out all of the weights so that they coordinated with the existing weights of the typeface and work in concert with how the type would be used against these shapes. And I just say, go look online, go look in the NFL app, and you can see all of this essentially being used, which is kind of fascinating, or at least for me. I'm going to throw this one over here and out of the way. Since I'm in glyphs, I will stay in glyphs because if we go back to the keynote really quickly, there's this cute little exasperated whew, and then the why now, what now. So I will start with the what now, show a few of the other typefaces and how and what I see work-wise. I tend to work in glyphs. Glyphs is a very specialized program specifically for type design. So it's kind of caters to the needs of being able to draw vectors in a much cleaner way. But you can see within here, this is a typeface. This is its name. I can say that because it is now copyrighted. So I'm not worried about somebody ripping it off. This will come out later this year in an exclusive way, and I cannot go into more detail so much about right now, although I really wish I could. In this case, with Crave, Crave has 3 optical sizes. So we'll have more of a standard print, and then as it goes up, we have a display in the fine version. So I am interpolating between that standard weight and the fine version. And when you go, what do you mean by the fine? Let's zoom in. And this is the standard, and that is the fine. It is very, 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 very thin, very, very sharp, and only really should be used in large ways. So this is a typeface that just released in November. I have had a popular typeface release, I guess 2008, called Lust. And over the years, I have received a number of requests for different versions of this typeface. Hey, let's move that out of the way. So I kind of committed to redrawing all of the original Lust masters. Let's see if and expanded both Lust DDOM, which were originally produced, and Lust Script, and added Lust Sans, a stencil version and a text version. Literally, I sat down and I aggregated all of the feedback and all of the requests that I've received over the years and just said, okay, I'm going to draw them all and then deliver them all at one time. And everybody go ooh and ah, and then I can kind of close the chapter on Lust, because there's a lot of other things I'd like to do. But I will admit, I enjoyed drawing this one. It's the same type of scenario when we're talking about drawing, in this case, instead of optical sizes, by focusing on weights. So here's the lightest weight. Here's the heaviest weight. Within the exports of these, we then establish, here's the thin, light, standard, italic, medium, bold, and black. In each case, all the weight information is included in here. And in this case, I'm only having to focus on one axis. So all nerdy, all out of the way. What other things? This is my beast, my baby. This is Mureicho, named after what I consider my emotional hometown in Japan, Takamatsu. This will be coming out later this year. and it will be free for everybody because Google has picked up the tab, so it will be fully available later. So those that are in the type community, hush, not yet. Don't talk. But the same thing, especially with Japanese, is same as with Latin. In this case, I'm interpolating out 6 weights. I've got essentially a monoline thick stroke and then a modulated one as it gets heavier, optically adjusted, obviously. So yeah, that's the nerdy stuff out of the way. I think, yeah. So there is one other thing that I wanted to discuss, and why I'm not finding it. There we go. So on what else is the what now? Something that I announced shortly after I launched the last website is something called Flourish. Originally, or at the beginning of the talk, I said it's all me. It's not all me anymore. To kind of address what I have felt is a disparity within the type industry, I sought out a series of what I considered rising talent within the type industry, kind of from all over the globe. Singapore, Brazil, Serbia, Taiwan. He's English and French, she's English and French, Thai. And hey, here's a guy that people in Atlanta might know, Scott Fuller. And call it Flourish. And really, this is something that should be with every foundry, in my opinion, developing young talent and giving them proper attention that they need and proper instruction so that they're coming into the industry well educated and well respected for the work that they are kind of carrying forward. Yeah, that's kind of thing. It really does matter. And it should be something that we're focusing on, not just in the type industry, but within the creative industry. Something that has aggravated me lately in this, I'm getting on a soapbox, but I've seen this both within both within the type industry and within the creative industry, with interns coming into studios and agencies, working long hours, really contributing to the success of a project. And that project launches and that intern is not given credit for the work that they've done. It's wrong. And I wish it could be changed more. But I think the best way for me to handle it is call attention to how to handle it right and put a little bit of pressure that way. So from other foundry standpoints, my hope is that they will be slightly annoyed and then hopefully copy me and hopefully make it better so that I go, oh, I need to change this so that I can offer a little bit more. But yeah, that's it. And I can't believe it. I got it within an hour. I'm 2 minutes shy. That said, I'm done. And you can look at the stuff behind me, or you can ask me questions. People have been typing things. I didn't see this. Okay, yeah. So people, if you can unmute yourself and want to ask questions and jump in, I'll answer anything. Well, not anything. That'd be weird. I don't, yeah, but let's see. I'm trying to think. Now I'm looking to see if there's any comments. There are not comments, but questions. Do you have any suggestion for a primer on how to improve your handwriting? Oh, Holly. Yeah. Yes. Serial killer. That's awkward. Okay. I'm gonna hang up now. No. Yes. Yes. Give me a little bit longer this year. Yes. I am one of those that really laments the fact that here in the US, they no longer teach cursive in most school systems. And it has been replaced in lieu of keyboarding skills, which I kind of cock my head at, because there's so much research out there to show that writing notes and handwriting increases retention. So yeah, there's been there's some strides out there. From what I would say right now, go look up, you can go to Amazon and look for Zaner, Zaner, and look for lettering guides. Zaner was one of the more prevalent models for cursive handwriting 30, 40 years ago. And the best I can tell, that was what I was taught. I would start there and honestly set aside time and just practice. I think, especially with the prevalence of social media and everybody hand lettering stuff and making cute things and posting it, many times from my standpoint and my background, I cringe when I see that. Not because I'm being hypercritical, but because I was like, oh man, if you've just been taught how to actually write these letters correctly, then the construct behind the script that you're producing would actually flow better. You'd have better modulation in the strokes. You'd have a greater harmony within what you're producing, which would then instinctively allow you to produce a better composition. So yeah, my tip on that, go look that stuff up and then maybe continue to stalk me in a non-serial killer way for announcements later this year. Please, no stalkery. Well, no, stalkery good. No serial killer stuff. That's awkward. Okay. So yeah. Any other questions? I'm going to drink some yerba now.
Well, thanks, Neil. Yeah, go ahead, Angelica. You can ask a question.
So my question's in the chat, and it says here, just recently this year, I turned my funny handwriting into a font on an app called Microsoft Font Maker. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to get into this? How to make money off of it and any good software?
Make money off of making fonts. Yeah, I mean, that's what I do. I draw letters, people make fonts. Or I make fonts out of them, people buy them. To start out, if you don't have a practical knowledge of type design and you're wanting to kind of make like craft level fonts, you're showing your handwriting, you see, oh man, there is a tool. Let me see if I can pull that up really quick. I have to do a Google search. Yes, fontself.com. Go there first. I'm typing this up in the comments. And if it doesn't come up as a .com, hell, I don't know. Yeah, no, it will. Yeah, it's showing up. I'm seeing it. This is, if you're wanting to kind of get into just the craft of it and make some things and play around with it to see if it's something, because a lot of people will say, hey, I want to make fonts out of my handwriting, and that's fine. I mean, there's no reason not to. But to be able to take your handwriting and turn it into a font for you to use is one thing. To then take that and make money off of it requires much more time. And there's much more consideration needed into producing a font that can be used by a larger audience. So you're going to have to be considerate of the language needs. So you're going to have to understand diacritics and how to produce properly drawn accented glyphs and kind of the tool, the requirements behind that. Typical typeface, just a standard typeface, has a lot in it. And I think many people that dive into that kind of forget that there's other things. I'll see if I go back. What do I have up? And I may share my screen again in just a second. Yeah, we'll go back to Lust Sands. I'm gonna share this. Give me a second. Sharing screen. I'll go back over here. Okay. There's a lot to kind of look here. Let me see if I can unzoom the view just a little bit. So my typical Latin typeface It obviously is going to include all of the main uppercase letter forms, but from a script standpoint, let's go to Latin. Basic character set obviously is the 26 letters upper and lower that we know, but for it to really be useful, you at least have to have Western European character set, which is going to include a number of diacritics. A minimum would include this, and some characters that a lot of people, especially here in the US, aren't aware that need to be there, like the thorn and a German double S. If you really want it to be commercially viable, you have to take into consideration Central European character set as well, because again, appeal and how it would be used. Plus, in context of all of that, you need to make sure that you've provided at least the base numeral set, the 0 through 9, but it's always helpful to have others. I tend to always produce fractions. And these are open type generated. There are some standards that I put in there, but thanks to open type, I allow it to automate. Plus you need to carry what should be considered at least the baseline for punctuation and the typical symbology. I'm saying all this not to shoot down the idea, but it's always to, to say, hey, okay, if you're gonna do this, you've got to commit to drawing a lot. But once you've got that, as I said, look for online platforms that allow you to sell type, especially from a beginner level. I would look at Creative Market and a few things like that. I would not, do not ever recommend giving your stuff away for free. It's your work. Why would you do that? That's silly. Shame on you. But I would look for online platforms to do that. I would also start spending as much time scouring the web for tutorials and online classes and things like that so that you become better informed. More knowledge you have, the more you're going to realize, oh my God, there's so much more I have to do, which is good. That's not to sound scary. It's your entry point, needs to be as well informed as possible, and I know from my standpoint, starting in the period that I did, we didn't have a lot of that. There were a few chat rooms and there was a few things like that, but you didn't have ways to really share your work. So the benefit to that is it allowed you to spend a lot of time honing your craft before you really took it to market. And I think nowadays there's such a rush to go to market faster and to be discovered and stuff like that. And I say just take your time, be comfortable with what you're doing before you start putting it out there, and don't allow yourself to be pressured by what you're seeing on social media. So
Thank you so much for the wonderful advice, though.
no problem. Good luck. It is a beast, but it is fun. Or at least for me. I can be a masochist, not to have a stalker come after me in a serial killer way, okay? I'm still not into that. Other questions?
Yeah, let's see. We can have probably 2 more questions so we can give Neil some time to breathe. I think we had a question from Lily. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Neil. This is Lily. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. It was wonderful, super inspiring. My question is, how do you sell the value of a custom font to, for example, a large company? I mean, you as a type designer, you can identify, compare, evaluate these subtleties like you were showing us. So how can you help a client get a grasp of why it matters and why it requires so much time, so much effort? How do you convey this to a non-designer?
Where I have seen the most success is actually going to them and talking about the money. And that sounds awkward to even bring up, but the larger the client, the more they are aware of the money that they have to spend. So if you have a brand, if you have something along those lines that is pervasive and is going to be out there, you have to look at the expense it's going to take and the separation that your brand will have in, like in public, and how it would be assessed. So you approach it from the money standpoint. If you are licensing a typeface to use for a brand and it is being used online, either web fonts or apps, there's going to be kind of a recurring expense that you're going to have to take on as a company. And that is just usually gets folded into a marketing budget or a communications budget. Initially, people will look at it and go, okay, but then they start looking at it over time, how much money they're spending towards licenses of existing typefaces. And that's where procurement and the business side kind of comes in. They realize we're spending a lot of money on this. Why are we spending money on it? And you say, well, it's for a brand. It's for our brand, But from the creative director or the art director, for the agency that's working with that brand, or for the internal creative, they are looking at, well, we have to have these typefaces. We have to spend this money. The alternative approach is custom type. So depending on the type designer that you're working with, or the foundry you're working with, and the amount of money that is going into that custom project, you can typically show, okay, this is what you're spending annually on typeface licenses of an existing typeface that is being used by other brands within your industry, hence diminishing the unique value of the brand that you have because you're using something that somebody else is using. So you look at it from that approach, you're wasting money on that. Plus you're spending money on recurring licenses. If you invest in custom type, something that you can use exclusively, where either your licenses that you have kind of evaporate because you're spending all of this money up front, depending on how the license has been negotiated, you end up saving money over time. So with most of my clients, the larger ones, when they share how much they're spending on licenses for their brands versus the money that they're going to spend on a custom typeface, they can actually see a point of savings within 3 to 4 years, where that investment has kind of run its course, and they're no longer having to license typefaces because now they have their own custom set of fonts. So usually it's very easy to have that conversation with an art director or a creative director or somebody that is managing the marketing for either an organization or an agency studio relationship. How you go back to try to sell that to the people that control the purse is by showing, yeah, you spend this money now, within 3 to 4 years, you're not having to spend any of that money. Or the percentage that you're having to spend is greatly diminished. And that usually helps kind of seal the deal. And honestly, I will, when a potential bespoke typeface comes before me, I ask a lot of questions, because sometimes I don't feel like a particular business or brand needs a custom typeface because of what they are establishing their needs to be. Sometimes it's better to say, here's an existing typeface. Now let's customize that typeface and add features to it that are very specific and indicative of your brand. You already know what that typeface essentially looks like because you're looking at it in my catalog. Now let's go and adapt it specifically for your needs and spend more time on the adaptation than we would on the custom side. That ends up saving even more money with the license. They can then afford to actually license everything that they need, and they cut out a lot of the development time because they're really only customizing aspects of the typeface and selecting either key weights that are needed within the larger typeface, or taking very specific features and adjusting them to better fit their brand. So there's different approaches to kind of take with this to help it turn into something fruitful for them. But you really have to try to assess what their needs are, not what they want. Sometimes the want is, we just want to save money. I'm like, okay, but that may not be the best thing. You may need to go a different route. If you're wanting to save money, you might want to look at other alternatives and just understand that your investment may need to be focused on one font, one typeface that used in a display capacity, and allow all of the other components to be things that are off the shelf, so that you can better control what that license is and your ultimate spend. So
That's really cool.
Thanks so much.
All right, we have one final question and then we will be done. Also, you guys are more than welcome to log out. Thanks for watching this. The last question, I think I could speak it for Roman. She asked, where do you go to get these fresh ideas and new concepts?
Oh, that's easy. I'm crazy. There, done. Now, honestly, it's for me, and for anybody who is into doing this, and enjoys it, you're going to find your own points of entry for inspiration. So there's no one tried and true way. For me, it's watching everything around me. I like to solve problems, weird ones sometimes, but I will look at something and say, can that be handled better with type? And this goes back to my process, this iterative process that I firmly believe in. I may produce a typeface that I like, and I go, okay, this is good. 6 months later, I think it sucks. But because I think it sucks means that I'm starting to identify other things that I could improve on it, other things that I could change, a different way that I could produce the letter forms to express things differently. That matters to me. So that one source of aggravation with a typeface can spawn 4 or 5 other ideas, either to expand on or improve on an idea that I had 5 or 6 years ago. So I am one of those. I do like to go back and look at the stuff that I did years ago and be as critical of it as possible, but also to update it, to look at what was done 10 years ago before type technology wasn't as good as it is right now, and see what I can do to build on that. And improve on what was done 10 years ago and bring it up to speed for this year. The other thing, and this is something that I firmly believe in, and I've tidied up, so it's kind of, I don't know if I'm looking down because I'm looking at sketchbooks. I keep sketchbooks, and each day I usually spend 15 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer. I like longer, where I will take a particular implement, be it a marker, sumi brush, pencil, pen, whatever, and I just letter. I just write. And essentially I use it as a warm-up for my hands, even though I'm not doing the same degree of lettering that I used to do. I still use that as a point to kind of get focused for the day, and kind of start my work. And sometimes those doodles lead to typefaces, or I'll have something stuck in the back of my head that it's in my head and I've been visualizing it there, and now I need to try to put it down on paper so I can see if it works. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I'll toss it, or I'll go, hey, that still sucks, but I know what I can do to make it better. So it produces its own launch point for other projects down the future. Sometimes I just go, God, I want to come up with something that is just insanely fat with really high contrast, and let's see just how hard I can make it. And those usually fall flat, but the exploration leads to other things. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Neil, for this wonderful presentation. Well, you guys have a wonderful day.